Lambert is a chimera. That means that his genetic makeup comprises that from two different species. In his case, he is both a Suffolk sheep and a human. Here's his story. From my earliest recollections, I knew that I didn't fit in. My father and I lived together on the farm, and I learned much later in life that the woman that I can only refer to as my father's ex-wife had moved out permanently shortly after my birth, out of shame at the sight of me. I attended neither daycare nor public school. I never learned to read or write. That's why I'm having to dictate this account of my life. What I've learned has come mostly from watching television and listening to the radio. However, I gradually came to notice the difference between my appearance and those of the children that I saw on television. For example, the configuration of my hands makes it impossible for me to eat with conventional utensils. Unusually, I'm equally comfortable walking upright or scurrying about on all fours. And most of all, my face, arms and legs are completely covered with fine black hair. Looking back, these differences, so-called, make it obvious as to why my father kept me secluded. I don't know whether I was given a name at birth or what it might have been, but eventually my father started calling me Lambert. I understood this to be a play on Bert, that's short for Hubert, my father's own name, and Lamb because of my affinity for the sheep. Whether he considered it a joke or not, I don't know. I simply accepted it in the way that children accept everything in their young lives. Truth to tell, I've never been told whether my birth was even recorded officially. I have never seen any evidence of a birth certificate. For this very lonely child, the sheep became my dearest and constant companions, and I quickly became adept in my role of being my father's assistant shepherd. Even as a young child, I could aid in delivering lambs, and for that task I was always allowed to stay in the barn overnight during the lambing season. The critical moments in the life of a newborn lamb were its very first, and I was skilled at encouraging the newborn to struggle unsteadily to their feet to suckle that all-important first feed from their mothers. My constant accompaniment of the flock made me as if I were one of them, and so there was never any fear or anxiety as I worked or played among them. None of this bothered me during my childhood. I ran wild, you might say, free and easy on the farm, and I readily found common cause with the various animals. I followed the sheep around the pasture, and even pleaded with my father to let me spend the night with them in the barn, usually to no avail except during the lambing season, as he wanted me to be safe with him in the house. I had a gradual dawning of enlightenment through everyday routine. This led me to know and eventually to accept my physiology and my situation. Every evening we bring the sheep from the pasture into the barn. That's as a precaution against predatory coyotes. There's grain in the feeders along one wall to induce the sheep to come in. Such is the enthusiasm of sheep for grain, there's always a veritable stampede to come in first from the pasture. On several occasions, while I was rounding up the last few stragglers, I chanced to see my father making strange thrusting pelvic motions while standing behind one of the ewes at the feeder. Then he'd slump momentarily against the ewe, and after that he'd make furtive adjustments to his overalls. As the first stirrings of sexual maturity arose within me, I began to connect my father's behaviour with that of the rams at breeding time. Innocently, I inquired of my father whether this was the same activity that I'd seen performed with the rams. With great embarrassment, he confided to me that his ex-wife had been uninterested in sexual matters. He'd taken to relieving his passions with one of the ewes as she stood at the grain feeder. I could readily imagine this, as I had observed that this was a favourite opportunity for the rams to perform their own service. I already knew enough about sheep husbandry to be aware that mating in the fall is followed by the birth of lambs in the spring. Did mating between my father and his ewe result in lambs being born to them, I asked. Scarlet with embarrassment, my father revealed that I had been the result of his union with his favourite ewe, who had always stood still for him whenever he felt the need for release with her. So, little Lambert, then, was actually the result of union between Bert and ewe. Now things began to fall into place. My body's part man and part sheep. That's why my front limbs do not have human fingers. Black face and legs reveal my heritage as part Suffolk sheep. The woolly fleece that covers my body, they're all ovine in origin. But my head is undoubtedly human in form. It's my good fortune to have a mind that's definitely more human than ovine. Also, my feet have human toes, and the structure of my hind legs and pelvis allow me both to stand upright and to sit in the human fashion. My inheritance explains my dietary preferences. I have a strong taste for raw leafy vegetables, and my aversion to meat, especially the mutton that made such frequent appearances at my father's table. It also accounted for the thickening of my woolly coat once puberty was upon me, and as a result I now need to have clothed myself in the human manner only in the very coldest weather. So how was I raised when I was born, I asked my father. Well, my father wanted to keep my birth secret from his ex-wife. He kept me in the barn where I was suckled by my birth mother. It's little wonder that I had such affinity with the rest of the flock. Some of them were my half-brothers and half-sisters. My father's secret came to light one spring afternoon while his wife's sister was visiting. The sister, who lived in the city, wanted to see the newborn lambs. As they went from pen to pen in the old barn, it was inevitable they would inevitably come across the one that housed my father's favourite ewe. And a little lamb, that's me. Sister-in-law, a true city girl, asked in all innocence about the unusual lamb in the pen, the one with the humanoid head and the toed feet. Her sister, his wife, quickly coming to the realization of what the sight portended, gave a stifled cry and fell senseless to the floor. Summoned to help, my father immediately took in the situation, and all this explained the shame of my father's wife and her abrupt departure from the matrimonial home. However, my father's needs continued to be met by members of his flock, which was how I had come to observe him. After his confession, he tried to be more discreet, but it was inevitable that there would be times when I would glimpse his acts of congress with the ewes. In fact, it came to seem perfectly normal, at least in that household where abnormality was the norm. But it will hardly surprise you to know that I was very conflicted when I underwent puberty. On the one hand, I was neither man nor sheep, but on the other, I was both. And thus it became a question of the direction that my burgeoning sexuality would lead me. My close proximity to the sheep flock, coupled with the example of my father, soon made the decision for me, especially because I had no other contact with the rest of my human inheritance. What my father did furtively and illicitly, I could perform as a natural act, and since I moved among the ewes as comfortably as if I were one of them, which in a sense I was, I could relieve my adolescent urges at will. I was a happy young man or a happy young ram, according to your perspective. My natural curiosity led me to wonder whether I would follow in my father's footsteps in being able to sire offspring. Since all sheep are tagged shortly after birth, I was able to study this question experimentally. Sheep are seasonal breeders. It's the custom among sheep farmers to allow the ewes in to service the ewes at a specific time each fall. The lambs are born in the spring, some 21 weeks later. It was only necessary for me to put my oar in, or as you might say, shortly ahead of the official breeding period. I simply noted which ewes I had serviced and kept track of their date of lambing. The result of my experimentation was that many of the earliest born lambs had characteristically short tails, hardly more than stumps. I also have no visible external tail. The matter is significant because it's customary to dock the tails of young lambs for the sake of cleanliness. Inevitably, this causes the lambs some distress. There's a small risk of infection. However, the tailless lambs turned out to have remarkable vitality, which I ascribe to hybrid vigour. They're quickly on their feet after birth and unusually fast growing. But since they are 3/4 Suffolk, they show no overt human characteristics. The casual observer, they're simply regular black-faced sheep, but without tails. My father was surprised to discover tailless lambs in his flock. It took him a little while to realise that all the tailless lambs had been born in the first wave, some of them significantly ahead of the expected 147 days of gestation. This time I was the one with the secret, and I was the one who had to make my admission. Unlike my father, for whom the birth of the half-human, half-ovine son was a unique experience, it appears that my own semen was as potent towards impregnating ewes as that of a genetically typical ram. It made my father quite excited by the vigour of my offspring, seeing possibilities for the sale of breeding stock. It would be necessary, however, to initiate a breeding programme to develop progeny that would be true breeding in these qualities. Accordingly, for the next breeding cycle, the following autumn, I was tasked with the responsibility of breeding as many ewes as I could or as I wished ahead of service by the rams. I ask you, how many adolescents are encouraged or even cheered on by their fathers to have sex with as many females as possible? It was for me a most satisfying experience. Once again, vigorous and tailless lambs resulted. Best of all, the twinning rate was exceptionally high. My father and I then selected the best of these lambs, both males and females, in terms of conformation and weight gain, to be bred together. Again, very satisfactory results were obtained. The traits of vigour, lack of tails, and propensity to produce twins were all maintained. We began to dream of developing a new breed of sheep, tentatively called the Southbert. As we set about this project, it seemed that the only way in which the new breed of sheep differed from conventional Suffolks, other than their lack of tails, was they were unusually alert mentally. But about this time a troubling matter began to concern me. Suffolk sheep are raised principally for their meat. Their wool is of poor quality and is thus only a byproduct. As a youngster, I scarcely thought about why we raised sheep or what happened to them after they were trucked away from our farm. But as I grew up, I realised that when each year's spring lamb crop left the farm in the fall, they reached an appropriate weight and they were destined for slaughter. That's a minor matter for the average child on a sheep farm. However, it was difficult for me on two counts. The sheep and their lambs were my constant friends and companions. They were much more to me than just the subject of animal husbandry. Moreover, once I became aware of my antecedents, I began to view these animals on the basis of kinship rather than as production units. The Southberts were my children and grandchildren. As a result, those that were rejected as unsuitable for the breeding line on the basis of conformation or vigour were sent to the slaughter like any other lambs. As a participant in the sheep raising enterprise, I bore partial responsibility for their unhappy fate. I fell into the worst of two worlds, kinship with the flock, but with sufficient human intellect to develop ethical concerns about the situation. Night after sleepless night, I wrestled with this problem. Did I have a moral imperative to try to sabotage the Southbert breeding programme? On some nights I saw myself as a leader of the flock, an agent provocateur, inspiring an uprising among the Southberts. So in my imagination, when the truck arrived to take them to the stockyards, they would refuse to ascend the ramp. They would turn on the truck driver and force him to remove his cursed death wagon from our premises. On other nights, the prospects for ovine rebellion looked poor. Intelligent though the Suffberts might be, they were still sheep, and I had no way of communicating any plan to them. Not that I did have a viable plan to organise them anyway. And even if I had, what was to stop the truck from returning with more men the next day, or the next, or the next? No matter how often the Suffberts might prevail in these skirmishes, they would surely lose the war. Then there was an even worse dilemma. Even if I somehow managed to be subversive and succeed in organising the Suffberts, on whose side would I line up on shipping day? Would my loyalties be with my father as my human kin, or with the Suffberts? And how might my father react? At least my outward appearance was sufficiently humanoid that I would probably not be put on the truck with the sheep. At least I hope not. On yet other nights I imagined persuading my father to give up sheep husbandry, perhaps go into a different line of farming. Perhaps we could raise pigs. At least it would then not be my kinfolk that went to the stockyards. But with my newfound moral sensibilities, or squeamishness if you prefer, this made me less enamoured of the idea of shipping any species for meat. And even if I could convince my father to give up the sheep business, there would still be the problem of the animals already on our farm. If we sold them to a neighbour, we would still be indirectly complicit in their fate. As for keeping them, we can hardly run the place as a retirement home for sheep until the last of them passes away. I could find no completely satisfactory solution, even if I were capable of bringing any plan to fruition. Always at the back of my mind, and very often in the foreground, is the selfish question of my own sexual needs and behaviour. In this respect, the present arrangements suit me very well. I have unlimited access to the ewes both in and out of season. And I can even console myself with the thought that my father's needs in that area are also being met. Who am I to be responsible for taking away one of the few pleasures in his own life? So up to now I've done what most individuals do when faced with ethical or moral dilemmas, and they can't decide, namely nothing. But I'm becoming more and more agitated. It's already August, and this year's lambs are due to be shipped next month. I think I need to slip down to the barn to relieve my anxieties and frustrations. Otherwise I'll never get to sleep tonight.